So far here, we've discussed potential ghosts, cults, witches, even a werewolf. People that know me just shake their head at my weird, morbid curiosity. Do you want to know what really, really scares me, though? Disappearances. Now, I'm not talking about the ones where someone maybe ran away, or maybe someone was abducted, or even where someone wanders off and gets lost. I'm talking about the unexplained ones. Cases where people are looking directly at you, then poof, you're gone. And there seems to be absolutely nothing you can do about it. One such case is well known in my area and has been talked about since the 1800s. The case of Orion Williamson. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture. Some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. In July of 1854, in Selma, Alabama, Orion Williamson sat on the front porch of his small farmhouse with his wife and son. Around midday, Orion spotted a neighbor in a nearby field across the road. Orion excused himself from his family, saying he needed to talk with his neighbor Andrew about an upcoming delivery of horses he'd recently purchased from another neighbor, Armour Wren. By the time Orion Williamson had crossed the street and entered the gate to Andrew's field, the sound of a carriage caught his attention. Orion looked up to find Armour Wren and his 13-year-old son James and their driver Sam approaching. Orion waited and exchanged pleasantries with the small group before continuing on his way across the field to meet Andrew. A little way down the road in the carriage, Armour Wren suddenly remembered that he needed to tell Orion that the delivery of the horses would be delayed by one day. He instructed Sam to turn the carriage around so he could tell Orion the news before he forgot again. When the carriage stopped and turned back, it caught the attention of Mrs. Williamson. She picked up their young son, then looked back to her husband Orion to make sure everything was okay. Orion was still crossing the field and had called out to his neighbor Andrew. At this point, 6 people are all looking at Orion Williamson crossing the field, counting the young son in his mother's arms. That's when Orion Williamson simply disappeared into thin air. Mrs. Williamson ran from the porch to the roadway just as the carriage came to a halt. Sam began hitching the horse that was pulling the carriage to the fence, and the others rushed to the field where Orion had been, no doubt thinking he had fallen into a hole or something. At that spot, nothing was found. Nothing at all. No crack in the ground, no hole, no disturbances in the grass, and no sign of Orion Williamson having ever been there. That's when Mrs. Williamson collapsed. It's said she collapsed from shock and was rushed to the nearby Selma hospital. Andrew and the Wrens continued searching the field for hours, but never found a trace of their friend or neighbor. As news spread about the incident, people from all across the community showed up at the field. A search party of nearly 300 men was finally assembled. Reports state they moved across the field inches at a time and in 3 separate hand-to-hand lines. This search grid was repeated dozens of times, with the search party kneeling down every few feet and checking the ground for any kind of openings or traces of Orion. The daylight faded over the hours, and the search continued under lantern and torchlight, but nothing was ever found. Bloodhounds were even called in to assist with the search, but that changed nothing. It was as if Orion Williamson had never been in that field at all. News continued to spread, and more volunteers arrived along with journalists from the surrounding communities. A team of geologists even showed up. The ground where Orion was last seen was dug up to check for any instability, but only solid bedrock was found a few feet below the surface. The search continued over the next few days, but ultimately the amount of volunteers dwindled. Mrs. Williamson insisted she could hear her husband calling out for help sporadically. Each time she claimed to hear the voice, she would rush out into the field to the point where the sound was, but nothing was ever found. The supposed haunting calls for help from Orion went on for several weeks, but each time they grew weaker and weaker, until sadly, they were gone forever. Armour Wren was called to testify in court about what happened that day. According to the reports, here is his testimony. My son's exclamation caused me to look toward the spot where I had seen the deceased an instant before, but he was not there, nor was he anywhere visible. I cannot say that at that moment I was greatly startled, or realized the gravity of the occurrence, though I thought it singular. My son, however, was greatly astonished. As we got out of the carriage at the gate of the field, and while Sam was securing the team to the fence, Mrs. Williamson, with her child in her arms, came running down the walk in great excitement, crying, he's gone, oh God, what an awful thing," and many other exclamations which I do not distinctly recollect. Her manner was wild, but not more so, I think, than was natural under the circumstances. James Wren also testified and backed up his father's testimony. After continuing searches turned up nothing at all, a local judge eventually declared Orion Williamson dead. Despite this, small searches continued through the fall and the winter. The following spring, in 1855, it's reported that a circle of dead grass appeared in the spot that Orion Williamson was last seen. The strange disappearance attracted journalists from all across the South, one of which was famous writer Ambrose Bierce. Mr. Bierce's work, titled The Difficulty of Crossing a Field, is credited with getting the case nationwide attention. Strangely enough, Ambrose Bierce also disappeared mysteriously in 1915 while in Mexico. Many theories developed from various researchers over the time, but the main theory that most support is the one provided by Dr. Maximilian Hearn. In his book, Disappearances and the Theory Thereof, Dr. Hearn suggests that Orion Williamson, along with many other cases he had researched, entered a, quote, void spot of universal ether. Another book, Among the Missing, an anecdotal of missing persons from the 1800s to the present day, written by J. Robert Nash, also supports this same theory. Universal ether was originally theorized and proposed by Aristotle. It was believed that energy traveled through ether, a mysterious substance that exists everywhere. Aristotle used this to explain the principles of natural phenomena like light, sound, and gravity. In Dr. Hearn's theory, this ether must have been how Orion Williamson's wife still heard his voice even though the body was gone. The main consensus with the ether void spot claims that it destroyed Williamson's body on a molecular matter level, or transported him to another dimension. Okay, science lessons over. My question would be, if he was destroyed at the molecular level, what was producing the sound of Orion's voice? We're probably talking about a ghost at that point, although the sound died out over a few weeks. We've seen here already that ghosts can hang around for a very, very long time. Then something jumped out at me. The possibility of being transported to another dimension. Now, we can dive back into science and talk about magnetic fields and string theory, or we can propose an adjacent theory that folks around here have talked about for centuries, and many across the world still believe in. Fairy rings. A different dimension or the realm of the fairies. That would be kind of the same thing, right? A world set apart from our own. Fairy rings are said to be the results of where fairies have been dancing. There are tons of folklore surrounding what happens to someone that disturbs a fairy ring, from curses of bad luck to being transported to the fairy world, or even sickness and death itself. Let's look at the possibility of being sent to the fairy world. Depending on the dissipation of the energy of the fairy ring, could it be possible that Orion Williamson's call for help could still travel through the ring back to the mortal realm? If this is the case, he could have been saved. Potentially. It's said that tossing wild marjoram and thyme into the circle could save a person lost in a fairy ring. But marjoram isn't native to the US and wasn't used that much until after World War II. Other legends say that the victim can simply be plucked out by an outsider. Also, that seems a bit sketchy to me. Unless they were armed with iron for protection. Others say that a stick from a rowan tree can free someone trapped within a fairy ring. Many of these legends also state that the rescuer must wait a year and a day from when the victim entered a fairy ring. Timing is everything, though. Victims that are said to have been saved reports that time works differently there. What was but a few moments in the land of the fairies often account for weeks or years here for us. Extended time in the fairy realm will result to you aging to where you should be if you're brought back to the land of humans. In a legend from Wales, a man rescued from a fairy ring immediately crumbles to dust when saved. Also, there's the story of Oisín and Niamh. I'll let my friend Cassie from Tales Told in the Dark tell you about that one.
Tir na Nog, the legend of Oisín, Niamh, and the land of eternal youth. Once upon a time, many years ago, there lived a great warrior named Oisín. He was the son of legendary Fionn MacColl in its English form. MacColl was the leader of Fianna, a group of great protectors who guarded the High King of Ireland, and each day Oisín and Fianna explored the beautiful green hills of Ireland as they hunted the land. One day, Oisín and Fianna saw a beautiful white horse in the distance. On its back was the most beautiful young woman they had ever seen. Her hair, the color of the sun, fell to her waist, and she wore a dress of the palest blue, studded with stars. She was surrounded by a golden light. As the beautiful woman and her horse drew nearer, all men stopped in their tracks, waiting to hear what she had to say. "My name is Niamh," said the golden-haired maiden. "My father is king of the mystical land of Tir na Nog, a land that knows no sorrow and where nobody ever ages. I have heard wonderful things of a great warrior named Oisín, and I have come to take him with me back to the land of eternal youth." Oisín immediately fell in love with Niamh, and although he was sad to be leaving his father and Fianna, he agreed to join Niamh on horseback to go and live in Tir na Nog, promising Fionn MacColl that he would return to Ireland to see him again soon. The fine white horse galloped across silver seas into the magical land of Tirnanog. As Niamh had promised, this was a land where nobody knew of sadness and where nobody ever aged. Everyone there lived forever. Together, Niamh and Oisín spent many happy times together, although there was a small part of Oisín's heart that was lonely. He missed his homeland of Ireland and longed to see his father and Fianna again. Oisín begged Niamh to let him return to Ireland, but she was reluctant. Although Oisín thought that only a few years had passed, it had been in fact 300 years back in Ireland, since in the land of Tirnanog time slowed down. Eventually, Niamh saw how much Oisín missed his family, agreeing to let him return to Ireland to see them again. She told him to take her magical white horse and to not get off the horse. "Do not let your feet touch the ground," she said, "or else you would never be able to return to Tirnanog again." Oisín set across seas on Niamh's white horse and arrived in Ireland. When he got there, he could see that things had changed. The Fianna no longer hunted green hills, and the grand castle that once housed his family was crumbling and covered in ivy. As he was searching for someone familiar in the green hills, Oisín came across some old men who were having difficulty trying to move a huge rock. He leaned down from his horse to help them, but in doing so, he lost his balance and fell from the horse. The moment Oisín touched Irish soil, he immediately aged the 300 years that he had missed in Ireland. An old, frail man, he asked the men he had stopped to help about his father, Fionn McCool, and they told him that Fionn had died many years before. Broken-hearted and many hundred years old, Oisín died soon after, but not before he shared legends and stories of Fianna, his father, great Fionn McCool, in the magical land of eternal youth that is Tirnanog. And even today in Ireland, these legends live on.
If this is the case for Orion Williamson, he may be best left alone. Who knows? He could be thriving and only experienced 5 or 10 years in his mind. Trying to save him now would ultimately finish him. If he were destroyed instantly on the molecular level, then there's nothing anyone could have done, which is the scary part to me. It just happened, no matter what anyone was doing, and nothing could have prevented it at all. With the beliefs and superstitions I've encountered firsthand, though, I'm leaning toward the fairy ring idea. If nothing else, it's just more fun. But fun comes with caution.